Okay, so let's take a look at the Blackjack challenge here. So let me go ahead and fork the replit. All right, so we'll move through a little quicker here as we start to, some of these are going to be kind of the same ground that we've already covered, right? So I get an input, I have one input that is a number, right? And I'm going to have an output that is a string. All right, so I have some coming in. Oh, let's look here. And everyone can see the challenge, correct, on my screen? I'm sharing the right monitor. Okay,
Yes.
cool. Thank you. So once we get our sum in here, which will be a number, so let's go ahead and just do console.log blackjack. All right, we can do 13. And so between 15 and 21, so we can do a 17, and we'll do 22, right? So this should be a hit. This should be a stand. And this should be a bust. All right. So what is something that we can use to basically tell our function to return different values? Like, what's the basic building block we want to use here?
If else.
Yeah, so conditional logic, right? The building block is conditional logic, or an if statement. So in this instance, so we could say if let's see here, it's 15. So if sum is less than 15, right? So it's less than, it's not less than or equal to 15. We want to return hit, right? And so if we run this, right, we should get hit and then undefined, undefined, right? And then we could say else if sum is, so we could be very explicit here and say sum is greater than or equal to 15 and sum is less than 21, I believe is the number we're looking for, right? Or less than or equal to 21. So because it's inclusive this time, right? So less than or equal to 21, we want to stand. All right, so hit and stand. And this allows us to change the order, right? Because I could just do this, right? And we still get stand here. But if I were ever to take this and replace it with this, right? So now we're getting hit and hit, right? So the order that is in matters, and there's things that we can do to protect ourselves, because if I do this, then I would still get hit and stand, because this is protecting me from a number less than 15 being treated as a hit. And then lastly, we can do else. Right? So then there's our hit, our stand, and our bust. So what's another way that we could solve this besides a if statement? So could we use a switch statement here?
You could, yeah, you could switch like with different cases.
Okay, so let's take a look at that. So let's do function blackjack to sum, right? And so we could say switch sum right? And so then our first case is sum less than 15, right? Oops. And we could do return hit, and then we want to break, and we want to do case sum is less than or equal to 21. I don't know why it keeps wanting to do that to me. Return stand, and then we can give ourselves a default, which will basically return bust. So when I change this to blackjack 2, and blackjack 2, right, I still want to see a hit, a stand, and a bust. I get bust, bust, and bust. Does anyone want to take a stab at what's happening here? And this is like a easy fix, but easy trap to fall into with a switch statement.
Is it like the opposite of the if statement where it's running your default first? Like you have to give it a reason not to just run the default?
Nope, I'm giving it reasons not to run the default.
Is it the semicolon after break?
Nope, you don't need semicolons, and I should put a break in here, but that's not what's causing it. But no, semicolons aren't really needed in modern Java. The only thing you use them for is in for loops at this point. Or I'm sorry, modern JavaScript. They're mandatory in Java. So basically, I'll still get my bust. So here's the trick with the case statement. I am taking sum, right? And I am saying sum is less than 15. What does, so if I say let example equal sum less than 15, right? And I say let sum equal 13. What if I go ahead and I console.log example, what do people think is we're going to see here?
True.
Yep, we're going to see
True.
we're going to see true, right? So what we're saying is this resolves to true, and so at no point will sum ever be true. So we're never hitting any of these cases, and we're falling through to our default. So if I take true and put it here, I'll go ahead and uncomment these. Now I'm comparing against true, right? So is like each one of these are we getting there? And so like if I give it 13, is that less than 15 true? And this is where the break is important, because I'm returning, it'll still end at the return. But if we were just running a program, and let's say that it was instead of returning, it was telling us to put it to the console like this, watch what happens without that break statement, right? I get a hit, and then because I don't break here, I go down to stand because it's less than that. And so like, because 13 is less than 15, and it's also less than 21. So the break right here will stop that from happening. Well, it hits undefined. But also, and the reason for that is because I'm still returning something, and I'm console.logging my return down here. But we always want to use breaks in case statements, just kind of like as a best practice. So we'll take this out of there. We'll put that back. And it's probably don't need to do it because it's saying unreachable code is detected. So I probably could just delete these out here. Right, because nothing happens after the return. But if you're not returning here and you're doing something else besides the return, the breaks are necessary because it'll do what's called falling through, and it'll do everything in each case that it's qualified to do to do, right? So, but this will work, but again, little trap there, because we still need to compare against something. So like when we're just doing it for the sum here, this still resolves to true at the end of the day. So again, little trap, but easy fix. Is just something to keep in mind if you do decide to use the switch statement versus doing like an if statement. All right, so the moment everyone's been waiting for and or dreading, and this isn't too bad. This is fizz buzz. Did you guys want to break back into groups and take a stab at it, or do you just want me to get into it? Okay, I've got a couple of get into it. Anyone objecting? Okay.
No objections from me.
No objections. All right. So let's take a look at FizzBuzz here. We've got the FizzBuzz test is an interview question designed to help filter out the 99.5% of programming job candidates. The text of the programming assignment is as follows, something similar to this. Write a program that prints an object with a number of keys. The key is the number and the value is either the number fizz, buzz, or fizz buzz. But for multiples of 3, assign the key's value equal to fizz instead of the number. And for the multiples of 5, assign the key's value equal to buzz. For numbers which are multiples of both 3 and 5, assign the key's value equal to fizz buzz. Otherwise, assign the key's value to the equal the number. All right, and we get an example over here of what that should look like if we do fizz buzz 100. All right, so a couple of things here, and there's different ways to do this, but this is specifically saying push it into an object and create key value pairs. All right, so my return, so let's see here. So I will have one input that is a number. I will have one output that is an object with key value pairs of numbers and corresponding values. Okay, so first off, because I know that I am going to have a object as a return, I know that I want to create that first. So console.log fizzbuzz, and we'll give it a number of, I'm just going to give it a number of 10 to start with, because it's going to start taking up a bunch of space in the console, and we can increase it once we get going. So I'm going to say let call it return object equals an empty object. All right, so I know that I need to count by 1. What is that telling me that I need to do, right? Like I need to create a key value pair with a key of 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. That is iterating. And so Scott threw it in the chat here, like we are going to use a loop again. All right, so we can say for let I equal 0, I less than num I plus plus. All right, so how do we add something to an object? All right, all we do is call it as a key. So I can say return object I equals I. All right, and let's go ahead and return object is a bad name. Let's just call it result object. Okay, no problem. We've got it recording again and everything will get posted. So, all right, so let's take a look at what result object looks like. Okay, so there are my keys of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, 9, all the way through. Now, when we take a look here, right, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. So I am getting this as a string. So we could take a look at see if I do it like this, will that? No, that doesn't do it. I'm not super worried about it. I coming through as a string. I can see if I can modify the keys later, but I am getting my number over here on this side. Okay. And so next would be, how do I, if basically I have a multiple of 3, right? I want it to be fizz. I don't want it to be the actual number 3. So how do I change this so that it's fizz? Anyone want to take a stab at that? Okay, so the modular operator, what building block would I put the modular operator in?
If.
Okay, in an if statement, right? So I say if I, oops, modulo 3, I think somebody dropped it in the chat for me, equals 0, right? So that means that it's evenly divisible. There's no remainder there. Then instead of just doing result object I want it to do result object is going to be fizz, right? And then, so let's go ahead and do else. And we'll put this down here. Oops. That. There. Oh, sorry, I lost myself here. So opening bracket, closing bracket, opening bracket, closing bracket, closing bracket. This needs to go here. That goes there, that goes there. These two go there. Now we're back.
How do you determine where you're putting stuff? Like the spacing? Our group was discussing this.
So it's hard in Replit, but the Replit set to two space tabs, right? So every time I hit the tab key on my keyboard, I'm going forward 2 spaces. And Replit, like, it's probably super hard to see. You may be able to see it better on your screen, but there's these little vertical gray lines that are getting drawn. In my real world, like day-to-day work, I use, again, because I'm using VS Code, I do things to basically help myself out. So if I do this and I pull up a challenge, right? Like I've got, so you can see here, this bigger here real quick. So I use basically like color brackets. So as I tab across, I'm getting different colors, right? And that helps me keep track of how far I am indented. And then if I'm not on an even tab, it'll throw like a big bright arrow red. But it basically, every time you go into a new block of code, so like a function, if I go into an if statement, if I go into a for loop, right, I am going to indent one line. And that's how you know, because if I take everything in here, right? And I go like this code will still run, but this is a lot more difficult to read, right? Even though, because we use this visual delineation to let me know that everything in here is inside of this function, right? And then all of that is all at the same level. I'm now in an if block, right? So that needs to be inside its block, right? Now the if block is closed. So I go back down to here. I've got another if block. And so that needs to be inside the block. So that's called being inside the block, basically. And it just makes it easier to keep track of everything. Right, and this one's pretty straightforward. Like this one, we can see like it's in 3 levels, and we see the color. Like employee data is going to use multiple levels, and it's just an easier way to keep track of everything. All right, so this is going to be I. So let's go ahead and run it now. All right, so right now we've exposed another issue in our code, right? So I'm starting to count from 0 and I'm stopping counting at 9, right? This isn't necessarily what I'm looking for. So let's go ahead and adjust my counts here, right? So starting at 1 instead of starting at 0, and it's going to be less than or equal to the number so that we include the last number that I put in there. All right, so now I start counting at 1 and I'm stopping counting at 10. So here's my fizz, right? And I've got my else right here. So I can do the same thing. I can say else if I modulo 5 triple equals 0. Clean that up. I can do this exact same thing, except that I'm going to result object as buzz. It's going to yell at me here. Can you guys still hear me? I see Steve moving. He's like my Mary in the coal mine. So he's the only one with his camera on. So if he freezes, I know I'm in trouble. All right. So saved everything except for the buzz. All right. So there's fizz, there's buzz, there's fizz, there's buzz. Okay. So what do we do next from here, right? We need to take care of fizz buzz, and we need things that are basically evenly divisible by both 3 and 5 to be fizz buzz. So where would I want to put that? Give me up on top.
Or at the start of the.
Wait, so why do I want to do it up on top?
It's the hardest to achieve. So if it triggers, you want everything else to not trigger after it. You don't want the easier things to trigger ahead of it because it'll stop the conditional logic.
Okay. I think it's getting phrased a little strangely, but you are correct. And basically what it boils down to is that if it is evenly divisible by both 3 and 5, and if I put it down here on line 11, it will never reach there because it'll either fire off here. It'll basically always fire off on fizz first, right? And so what we want to do is make sure that basically the condition that could be met with other conditions is the first condition that we fire off, so it doesn't fire off on this one or this one. And I'll show you here just so we can see exactly what it looks like. So if I say if else, right, I say I modulo 5 triple equals 0, and I modulo 3 triple equals 0, then we wanted to say fizz buzz, right? And then we can say else and do this. So what I'm expecting to happen here is that I will never see fizz buzz. Well, I'll never see fizz buzz because I never counted that high. So let's jump it up to 100 here now. Right. So on 15, I've got fizz, right? Because it hit that because 15 is evenly divisible by 3, 30 is fizz, and 45 is fizz. Okay. So this needs to go up here. And then this can be turned into fizz, and this can come back to just this. All right, so there's that. Is it gonna run for me, or is it gonna keep yelling? Okay, there we go. All right, so sorry, it was not scrolling down for me. Right, so now we've got 90, we've got 75 is fizz buzz, 60 is fizz buzz, 45 is fizz buzz, 30 should be fizz buzz, and 15 is fizz buzz. So now this is looking good. Does anyone want to take a stab at how we could clean this up a little bit right here on line 7?
Make it 15.
Yep, exactly. So basically, because if it's the, what is it? Oh, what's the math term? Is it the greatest common denominator? Or basically like the first number that is equally divisible by both 5 and 3 is 15. So we can just do modulo 15, or least common denominator, I think is what it's called. That sounds familiar from 7th grade math. And so we still get fizz buzz here, right? So, and this would just clean everything up. All right, so I know like that one can seem a little daunting, but all we need is a loop and some conditional logic, and we have to pay attention to what order our conditional logic goes in, right? And like this one specifically said, throw it in an object. Sometimes they won't even say throw it in an object, like you'll just console.log either fizz or buzz or the number. So that's just like a little extra added twist there, but this is the solution to that. All right, so it is 7:30. Let's go ahead and take a quick 10-minute, well, and actually, I'm sorry, before we take a break, are there any other questions that anyone has about how we solve this or anything we've talked about up until this point?
I've got one, Charles.
Yes.
If you remove let result object, if you remove that, and rather than result object I equals fizzbuzz, just put return fizzbuzz. Like, do you have result object in there so that, was that so that you could test it throughout? Was that the intent of that, or is that a necessary part of the function?
It's a necessary part of the way this was described, because it says write a program that prints an object with a number of keys. The key in the number is the number, and the value is either the number fizz buzz or fizz buzz. So you can technically do fizz buzz without doing this, but this specific wording. So when you say, and again, this is like your cheat. If you hear something that has keys or key value pairs, you're always working with an object.
Okay.
And so as soon as, and I mean, we specifically say do it in an object here, but like if they said hold your values in a data structure as key value pairs, that's telling me I need to use an object. to
Okay.
solve the problem.
Okay.
But no, like, I mean, I could get rid of this and I could say, like something, well, here, I won't do this. I'll just do this here real quick. So I could do an alternate for loop here that says for let I equal 1, I equals 1, I less than or equal to num I plus plus. And then say, let's grab this. Right, and this is doing the same thing.
Okay.
Just another way to solve it. But again, the it's not being like intentionally tricky or misleading, but like if you were solving this on a test and it told you to do it this way and you did it this way, like technically this would probably be like a partial credit answer.
Okay.
All right. Any other
Thanks.
questions in here? Yeah, no problem.
I did have a quick one, and we can either answer it before we go on break or after, but I probably just need to go back through like day one. But the for the for loop, the I plus plus on the very end, it seems like we're always just doing like a plus plus of some flavor there. So like what would be a situation that we wouldn't do that?
So if you were to
I guess I mean if you say let I equal 100 and I is greater than or equal to number and you're trying to count down, you would do minus minus, but like
right, and so you see plus plus because typically for loops are used to iterate through each element in a array, an array, and so that is like the most common usage of them, right? But technically you can increment I, but whatever. So if I had a problem that said, like, give me, I mean, you can get super complicated, right? Like I could increment I by like a square root or something like that. And so like find me all of the prime numbers, right? Between like 1 and 400 million. Right. And so I could use that to basically iterate through and calculate prime numbers. But you can technically do it by anything that you needed, right? Like, so if you were doing, say, basically like counting by twos or counting by fours or whatever, like you can increment by whatever you want to. Plus plus is just shorthand for I plus equals 1. Right, so I could say for let I and 0, I less than 100, I plus equal 3, right? And then do console.log I, and I would hope to see, right? So now I'm counting by threes, right? And it's whatever you need it to be, you can increment by. All right, so I can. Nope, didn't like that. That's an infinite loop. So, but I mean, like there's, because I did I is equal to 0, that's why. And so any number times 0 is 0. But I could come down here. Oh, now it's going to yell at me for all sorts of reasons. Clear that. Right, so now I'm multiplying by 3, right? So I go 1, 3, 9, 27, 81. Right, you could program this to do Fibonacci numbers. You can do it prime numbers. Like you can do anything you want to. It's just, and for learning purposes, we're using for loops, and like, and for using like this is to count and to increment. But typically, anytime that I would be going through an array, I wouldn't do a for loop. Like I would do a dot map or a dot for each, depending on what I need the resulting data structure to look like. All right, so this is old school land nav with a compass, and then once you get out into the real world, they're going to give you the real time like satellite GPS plugger, and that's going to be your dot map. But right now, while we're doing everything, we're just learning how it works under the hood. So everything I'm doing is a for loop. And a lot of these could be done as while loops as well. But kind of as like for the very beginning, like I can show you all sorts of different ways to do it. And I try and show like alternate ways, but while everyone is still kind of grasping, like probably everyone in the class knows exactly what a loop is at this point. But my guess is that people still may be struggling with why or when they would use a loop. And so showing you 3 or 4 different ways to do loops isn't as important as showing you how to do it the same way over and over again, so that because you only have to be good at it one way, right? And then that's going to be is what's going to help you solve the problem. Are there, does that answer the question, or?
It does, yeah.
Cool. Any other questions before we take a quick break here? Okay, cool. So it's 7:40. Let's go ahead and get back to it at 7:50. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording. All right. Welcome back from the break. We just wrapped up FizzBuzz. Were there any other questions? Scott, I think I saw, or James, you'd thrown it in there about the way that I had written the function, just the style, the ES6 versus the older style function. I had put a note in there. So these are the same thing. In fact, I don't even need to do that in here. So function FizzBuzz and then parens num open bracket is the same thing as const FizzBuzz equals num fat arrow open bracket. So it's those are both do the exact same thing. Yeah, you can't, you shouldn't be renaming a function. So typically when you do the fat arrow, you do it as a const, because this is not reassignable. And so it will always be this function. I don't know if it'll blow up if I try and do let, but you shouldn't do let. Right. So and it still works, but you don't typically, like, again, just because you can do it doesn't mean that you should do it. Best practice is to either do it as a const or just to do it as a function. You wouldn't use var. You won't see var in modern JavaScript anymore, right? Because I mean, like, it would look like this. Like all of these technically would be var, right? And we just don't really do that anymore because of the introduction of const and let and the additional control that const gives you over your data. So you can go through the entirety of code Platoon without using var once. Cool. All right, so next is detention. So instructions here is all of the students in 5th and 6th grade have detention. You can tell a student is in the 6th grade if a 6 is the highest number in their student ID. If the highest number in their student ID is less than 6, they are younger. If it's greater than 6, they are older. The same rule applies for 5th grade students. Write a method that takes a student's ID as a string of unknown length and returns a Boolean true if the student has detention or false if they do not. All right, so all of the students in the 5th and 6th grade have detention. Doesn't sound like much fun. All right, so I have one input, and that is a string. Going to have one output that is a Boolean. All right, so let's start taking this step by step. So let's just go ahead and say console.log ID, right? And let's go ahead and grab both of these. These over here, we'll comment this out. Whoops. Comment that out and comment that out. Right, so when I run this, I'm just getting the IDs. Now, looking at this, I need to find the highest, like I need to iterate through my string, right? And I need to basically figure out the highest number that is in here. So let's take a look at some things that we can do here. So we can do a for loop. So let's do for let I equals 0, I less than ID dot length, and I plus plus. So again, the same kind of iteration that we're doing here. So let's go ahead and console.log ID I. Right? So notice I did not split this into an array, right? Like I can iterate through a string and strings have index values just like an array does, right? I could split ID out into an array if I want to, and depending on how I need to manipulate the data, I may do that. So now the issue becomes I need to figure out if the highest number in here is either a 5 or a 6. Now, the first got you in this, like, through this step, does anyone want to take a stab at something that may trip us up here? And if you don't know, it's perfectly fine. This one's not super obvious. What does it mean when our text is in white?
String.
It's a string, right? So if I do this, right, there's a white 6. If I do this, it's not white, right? So when I do this, I get false, right? And if I do this, I get true. But I really only want to know what the biggest number is, right? So I need to disregard all of the letters in here. I only want to take a peek if it's a number. And this comes back to like when we were dealing with toFixed. Does anyone remember the command that we used to coerce something into being a number?
Was it a parse?
Yep. So we should be able to do parseInt on this. right? And there's my actual number instead of a string. Anyone want to take a stab at what happens when I do this? I get nan. Anyone know what that stands for?
Not a number.
Not a number. Yeah, sounds like somebody's ran into that problem before. All right, so that's helpful in this situation though, right? So now I know that as I iterate through here, right, I am either going to get a number or I am going to get not a number, right? So that separates all the letters that I don't need conditionally from all the numbers that I need to compare against. All right, so the next step is I need to know which number is the highest number, right? So let's say let highest number equals 0. All right, so now we can say if parse int do ID I is not equal to NaN, and I don't think I need to put this in quotes. We'll figure that out here shortly. And oops. So, and this is, so I'm going to make this a little bit more readable. I'm going to say let that, and then I can take this, and say num of I, and that's a little bit more readable than having to keep wrapping and parsing it over and over again. And so if this is not equal to not a number and num of I is greater than the highest number, which starts off as 0, make that that. So let's go ahead after we do the if, we get done with the loop, let's go ahead and console.log highest number and see if this worked. So I've got 6 out of one and 7 out of the other. So that looks like it worked to me. And so now we need to basically figure out if they have detention or not. So after we do all of our looping and we get our highest number, we have to say if highest number is equal to 5 or highest number is equal to 6, return true. And if we don't return true, we'll return false. Oops. Console.logging. And these need to go into consoles. All right, so there's my true and there's my false. All right, and if I throw a 9 in here, let's throw it in the middle. All right, I still get my false false. So Go ahead and let's grab this. And let's throw it into Python Tutor. All right, so let's visualize the execution. All right, so this happens in 54 steps. So we'll try and move through it a little bit quicker. So we come in here, step one, we load all of this into memory. It's here, it's not doing anything. We hit line 15, and now we get our call to action. Hey, run this function, give it this parameter. All right, so notice how ID up here is now equal to our string, and highest number is undefined. Now highest number is 0. So we come into our loop, right? I is equal to 0. And then basically num of I is that, and we keep iterating through. So we're not, so it's now nan, right? So we need it to be not equal to nan. And sorry, and I missed the highest one got to number 1 because that was like the first one. So, and that'll stay the same until we get to 3, right? So I is now 3. Yep, so num of I, there we go. And now highest number is 3, right? And we
What's happening on line 6?
Line
I guess I can't figure that out.
So what we're saying is highest number is equal to the parse, like the parsed integer of IDI. Right. And so for us to be able to get there, first off, num of I, which again, I just assigned this a variable to make it easier so I didn't have to write parse int 3 times. And so what it's saying is when we get to line 5 and it's saying that whatever this is, so in this instance, it resolves to 3. So num of I is the actual number 3, not the string of 3. And it says we need both of these conditions to be true. So that it is not equal to nan, which it is not equal to nan, it's equal to the number 3, and that is bigger than the existing highest number, right? Which up until that point was 1. So if I move backwards here, so the highest number is 1, right? Parse int num of I is, so it's undefined, we hit it, it's 3, right? So 3 is not equal to nan, 3 is greater than 1, highest number. So that means we come in and we actually execute the block of code, and then highest number becomes 3, right? And so highest number is now assigned the value of 3. Right, and we'll I can keep speeding through here because everything else is a nan until we get to 6. All right, so block 9. So 10. So now, no, so we're on, this is basically in the I mean, this is index of 9. So the 10th place in the length of 10, and num of I, it parses into 6, right? So num of I is 6 is not equal to nan, so that resolves to true. Num of I is greater than the highest number, which is 3. This resolves to true. So that means we come into the if statement and we execute this. And so we say highest number is now equal to num of I, which is 6. So when I execute that line of code, highest number is now going to become 6. And now highest number is 6. Right. And now we've broken out of our for loop because we've iterated through the length of our string. And now we have to basically say, we're going to check, is the highest number equal to 5? Instead of and, it's or. And so this is false, but this is true. And so as long as one of these conditions is met, we'll return true. If neither of these conditions are met, we skip over return true and we drop down to return false. right? And we know that we're going to return true here. We hit next, and there's our return value of true. So, and again, this is happening in milliseconds for us, like when we click the button here, right? I mean, I just hit the button and it's spitting out the answer. And I mean, this is slow because it's like it's a virtual bit of memory allocated to a browser. But like if you were to do this in VS Code, like, I mean, it is doing it, and I mean, you can time your execution. I mean, it's doing it in a matter of milliseconds, right? And so what this does is this just slows it down, and it shows us every single step that the computer is walking through.
Hey, Charles.
Yes, sir.
Can you, so like as a beginner, I'm used to like if else, if, and then if else, but I see here that you like if, and then, you know, highest number equals num of I, and then you go into another if, right? Can you just continuously stack if statements and they
Yes.
once the first if is satisfied, it then moves on to the second if, and if that then is satisfied, like I don't know if I'm asking a question or just kind of talking through it, but like, so essentially you can stack a bunch of if statements on top of one another and they'll run through in order. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. And the reason why we use else statements or especially else if statements is to keep things cleaner. But I do want to point out that this if statement is inside of the loop, right? So this if statement is checking a completely different piece of logic than what this is. So it wouldn't make sense to put this in here, right?
Okay.
Like this is checking through each element or like each character in my string, and then basically conditionally controlling if I'm going to reassign the value of highest number.
Okay.
And that happens in the loop. And then once the loop is done, we exit the loop, the program comes down here, and now it's taking highest number and it is not assigning a new value to it. It's just checking if it's basically equal to either one of these values and then determining if we should return true or false. Okay. Now, I'm using a little bit of shorthand right here, but this could also be represented this way. All right. And so because this is like the last thing my method is doing, I'm allowing it to get to false without the else, but this does the exact same thing as the way I was doing it before. It's just adding the extra else clause in it. And same thing up here. I don't have an else statement because basically if it doesn't meet this, I don't need it to do anything, right? So okay. if it doesn't meet these two requirements, just go to the next part of the loop, right? And so to do that, I'd basically just do this like an empty else statement. And we don't need that code there. Like I'm not giving it any specific instruction. So it's just as easy to do this.
Okay. I've never seen that. I appreciate the explanation.
Yes. But I mean, technically, like I could come back here to Blackjack, right? And I could make a additional version of this where I say, let's do function Blackjack 3 sum, right? And then let me just grab this. right? And this works as well, right? This is more like more lines of code, like I'm stretching it out a little bit. It isn't necessarily convention, but this would work the exact same way.
Would
So
you hear about that from a supervisor? Like, would someone tell you to clean that up, or would they be okay with that?
Yeah, I mean, I'd probably get asked like, what were you doing here? Typically, but there's also scenarios where it makes it more readable. This wouldn't be a scenario because this is basically logic happening for the same reason, right? Like we want to know what what our cards sum up to. So like doing this in an else if would be the best way to do it. Typically, like you will see what are called guard clauses, and I don't want to go too far down the road to make it like confusing, but what would happen is if let's say that I have a bunch of like complicated logic down here, right, that plays my game of blackjack, but there's a like in a game, and let's say that if player hits X button, right? So basically, if the player hits the X button, exit game, right? And so this is a guard clause that basically whatever else is happening, every time we run this method, if the first thing the player does is hit the X button, it exits the game, then I don't have to worry about any of this other logic down here, right? And so, and that's just, so that's typically where you'll see like standalone if statements. And then the other place would be is when you want something to happen conditionally, but if that condition isn't met, you don't need anything else to happen, right? Like the else is, so if is, if this happens, do A, else do B. And when you just have an if statement, you're saying if do A, and that's it. There is no B. Just keep going about your business, basically. And that's what the program does. All right. Let's see here. Okay, so that's pretty much it for detention. Were there any other questions in here on this?
Yeah, I have one more question about the highest number equal nullify. So when that triggers, it's essentially, I don't know if redeclaring is a word, it's essentially changing the value from highest number equals to 0 to the current nullify, correct?
Right, you're
I
reassigning the
don't know if I
value.
asked that well. Okay.
Right.
If
So,
you had used const there, would it not allow that?
yeah, I believe that would force it to blow up. Right, type error assignment to
I had
const.
it backwards.
Yep.
I was thinking let was the one that didn't let you reassign itself. Perfect.
No, let is flexible. Const is basically it maintains a constant variable, right? Like it says it has to stay this way. No reassignment. All right. Any other
Okay.
questions in this? Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at two strikes. I think will be the next one here. If I remember right, this one was a little bit more difficult. Let's see here. So write a method that takes in a string array of license plate numbers. The method should return a string array of any plate numbers that appeared at least twice. If none of the plate numbers appeared more than once, the method should return an empty array. All right. So this one is definitely a little bit trickier. All right, we got some tests here. So let's go ahead and run this. So we get undefined, undefined, undefined. So 2 strikes. Oh, so they're not true tests. They're just telling us this is what we expect out of there. Okay. Alrighty. So we are going to have one input, which one input and array of strings. And we're going to have one output, which is an array. It's either going to be an array with array of strings or an empty array if there's no duplicates in there. All right, so just do return plates since we're already console.logging each of them. So there's our array. Okay, so basically what needs to happen here is that we want to take a plate, be it just any plate out of there, and then compare it to the rest of the plates to see if it appears twice, right? And if it does appear twice, we need to add it to an array of results, right? So notice how our answers here. So the answer to this isn't just 3, 4, 5. It is the string of 3, 4, 5 in an array. And if there was multiples in there, we would see each additional plate in here. All right, and then if there are no duplicates, we would want to see an empty array. So I know that we're not going to be returning plates directly here. We'll most likely be returning results. So let's go ahead and say let results equals that. And let's go ahead and return, return results. All right. So right there, one of our tests is passing. 1 out of 3, not terrible. All right. So if we were to tackle this and we know that we want to compare plates against the other plates, we know that we're going to need to iterate. So when we iterate, we're going to want to use a loop. Now, with this, because in my head, I'm going to, so I'm not comparing the plate to the to itself as I'm going through there. I'm probably going to do something to isolate the plate. So let's see here. Let's go ahead and say, well, first off, we can just loop through here. So for let I equal 0, I less than plates dot length I plus plus. All right. So I can now say console.log plates I. Right, and that is giving me each plate. Now, what I would probably want to do here is say, we're going to need a nested loop for this. So let's say, well, let's just do this next. So let's go ahead and say, this one is a tricky one. So we're going to want to do, let's say let plate, and we'll say popped plate equals plates dot pop. All right, and so when we do that, we say console.log popped plate. Hold off on this for a second. right? So there's our popped plate. So that is the last plate in the array. And so what I would do, and then I want to make sure that this is actually removing it. So like if I do console.log plates, right? So here that 34B317, it's gone off of here, right? So it's not there anymore. And I need to be able to iterate through, because I can't just pop the plate one time. It's going to be each time through. So, and each time I pop a plate off, it is going to be an index value shorter, right? So we're going to go from a length of 5 to a length of 4 to a length of 3 to a length of 2 to a length of 1. So probably what I would say at that point is I'm going to need a while loop that basically says, while my plate.length is greater than 0, keep popping plates off there. Right. So if I say while plates.length is greater than 0, go ahead and pop a plate off there. Right. And let's go ahead and do this, just so we can watch it happen. Right, so there's this one, this, and then this, and this, and then this, right? So we're grabbing each plate and we're seeing if it basically is, we're removing it from the array, and then we're going to compare it to each element that's left in the array. So if we then come in here, this, and let's go ahead and take that and that. That and that. So we can say for this plates.length, and we can say if it would be popped plate is equal to plates I, right? How do we add an element to an array? Does anyone remember? It's a built-in method.
Push.
Yep.
Push.
Dot push. So we can say results dot push. We'll call it popped plate. All right. So here we go. Let's see what happens when we do this. And now we're going to return results. All right. So there's that. And now it looks like, and this is, so this one's passing, this one's passing. This one just tells us that we should have an array with the value 2 in there, but we see those multiple 2s, right? So we can take a look at this in Python tutor, and let's watch what's happening there. Let's clean this up here real quick. Python tutor, edit this code. And come back over here. All right, so let's visualize the execution. No, sorry, let me take it out of the console. All right, so let's watch what happens. All right, so we get, basically we call our function and we're going to look at what we have here. So we have plates, which is basically this array of 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, right? And then we're going to assign let results just to an empty array. And while plates.length is greater than 0, we're going to start popping off the last plate, right? And so notice let popped plate, it's undefined. Now it's the value of 2, right? So now we come into our for loop, let I equal 0, I less than plate set length, I plus plus. So now we're going to take this popped plate and we're going to compare it to each of these individually. All right. And so as I do that, so pop plate equal to plate 0, no, so nothing should happen there. All right, we skip back up into the loop. We come down, now we hit our first 2. All right, and we just basically came in here and said results push popped plate. Okay, then we come back up in here again. Is 3 equal to 2? It's not. So and then we come back, is 2 equal to 2? It is. So we come back in here again, right? So now we've just done it a second time, right? And then we pop again. Notice how that 2 came off, right? We come in, we check it. Is it equal to 1? No. Is it equal to 2? Yes, it is. So we push that 2 again. And then basically like we can iterate through the rest of the steps. It's never going to hit that value again, right? And that's how we end up with our return value of an array with 3 2s in it. So what could we do to protect ourselves here so that we only end up with the 1 value in there?
Is there some way to like tell it basically if I don't know, if in this case, if the array is, you know, like length is greater than 1, you just don't push it. I don't know how I would do that, but
Well, so you're kind of on the right path. We need to limit it, but what would happen if, so like this one's a double, and then if we also then took this and doubled up this one, right? Because now what would happen is as soon as we get any result in here, we would say that the result, like the length of the array is 1. So do not push any other results in here, even though this one technically should be 2, right?
you need to put like another if that's like, you know, if it just another one that says if it is equal to like strictly equal to popped plate, like, and somehow tell it it's not going to push it.
Well, you're on the right track. We want to clean up our if logic, but what we want to do is we want to conditionally do it based on if that result is already included inside of the array, right? And so what it would look like is, and so both of these need to be true. Results dot include popped plate. All right, and now this gets us one step closer, but this will only return true once it's already in there. So if I run this, oops, this probably includes, right? Now they're all empty. And basically this is where the bang operator comes in again. So now it's saying if it includes it, basically return false. Right? And so now the first time it's not in there, great. And then so it's basically it's not in there, return true. And then the next time when it is in there and it says true, we flip the polarization on it, we bang it, and we turn that true to a false. And then it won't go in the second time. And so just to give you a kind of like a visual of what's going on here with that is, so when I take this conditional logic, Okay, so as we walk through this array, so we'll say 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, right? So what's going to happen is the first time through, we're going to have 2. So popped plate. I'll just do it this way. So popped plate is 2, and we're asking it, is it equal to plates I, which is 1, right? So this is going to resolve to false, right? So we never even come over here and say, is popped plates 2 inside of results array? And at this point, results array is empty. So this is basically true. All right, so now the next time we loop through, we basically say, is 2 equal to 2? And that is true. And results is still empty. So 2 is not included. True. All right, and so both of those are met. So now that's what results looks like. All right, so the next time we loop through, all right, we say, is 2 equal to 3? Also false. Right? And but this is still true, but it doesn't matter because this is false. This only happens when both of them are true, right? And so now so actually I apologize. So that's false. And this is also now false. Right, and so we don't, neither condition is satisfied here, right? And then same thing. This is true, but because 2 is already in here, this is false still, right? And we won't hit true again all the way through, right? And we would basically iterate through 2 and then 2 again. Or actually, we wouldn't do that last 2 because we popped it off, right? So that's it. And then basically popped plate would now be 2 again. And then we would just basically compare it against these 3 lines, right? And then popped plate would become 3, and we compare it against these first 2 lines, and then 2 again, but we never hit that true value. And so that's what's happening each time we iterate through, and it's checking this against this, against this, against this, against this, and then this goes away forever. And then it takes this one and checks it against this and against this and against this. And it asks these same questions each time. And both of them have to be true for anything to be pushed into the results array. right? So if I took a 3 here and ran this, right now 3 and 2 are both in there. And it doesn't matter if I add a bunch of 3s in here, right? Like I still only get my 1, 3 and my 1, 2. This one was a little bit trickier. So any other questions on what's going on in here?
Yeah, so in line 4, let results equal empty bracket. Where's the command within here that's sending something to results? Oh, okay, yep.
Right, so remember if we do add element to array JS, right? Array prototype dot push. The push method adds 1 or more elements to the end of an array and returns the new length of the array, right? And so, and notice how I'm using it as an individual, but you can push multiple elements into an array at the same time. So let's go ahead and do this and take that and we'll throw this down here. All right. So, but yeah, basically we're saying if pop plates and plates I are equal to each other and the value of the pop plate does not already exist inside results, add it to results. Any other questions on this one? Okay, so let's go ahead. It's 8:41. I think we've got time for one more challenge here. So this is largest error. This is write a function that takes in a list of incorrect numbers and a correct number. Return the incorrect number furthest away from the correct number. All right, so we have an array of incorrect numbers and then a single correct number, and return the number that's furthest away. So it looks like we'll be given both positive and negative numbers. And then let's see here, and we have to account. So it's not just necessarily the smallest or the largest number, it's the number that's furthest away from the correct number, right? And so and i's kind of get drawn to -10 here, but -10 is only 1 away from -9. 3 is basically 12 away from -9, and then 6 would be 15 away from -9. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look here. So same kind of questions that we always ask ourselves. We have 2 inputs this time, an array of numbers and a number. All right, and I'm going to have 1 output, which is a number. All right, so let's go ahead, take a look here. Let's console.log wrong nums and correct num. Is that what we called them? Yep. And let me grab these. Comment that. We will wrap it in some console statements here. All right, so there's our array and our number. So knowing that I'm not going to be outputting my correct number or my wrong nums, I know that I'm basically going to be outputting the number that is furthest away. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look. We can say let furthest away equal 0. And I know that I'm going to need to iterate here, right? Like I know I'm working with an array. I need to compare each element in here against this number mathematically somehow. I'm not quite sure how I want to do that yet, but I know that I'm most likely going to be needing a for loop here. All right, so let's go ahead and just whip up a standard for loop to start. Wrong nums dot length and I++. All right, so let's go ahead and console.log wrong nums I, oops, box I, console.log, how about console.log? All right, so there is each of the elements. I'm getting an undefined because I'm not returning anything out of my function yet. I'll just return furthest away, and that'll always be 0 for each of those because I'm not changing it at all yet. All right, so we need to figure out how to identify which number is furthest away. So if we just look at this, only looking at the first one, and we want to say with 0, right? So is our number furthest away, or I'm sorry, that's our correct number. So we can say, let's see, let's do correct num minus wrong nums I. All right, so let's go ahead and see what this does for us. All right, so I've got -3, -6, and 10. All right, so basically I added it to 1, took it away from the other ones. Let's see here. So how could we go about equalizing for negative and positive numbers with this? So even outside of programming, what is that math term that we use to find the value of like two distances that may have different, like between 2 points, regardless of what direction we're moving, if it's positive or negative? Absolute. Yep. So we could look at maybe normalizing this with like an absolute value. So if I say JS absolute value, so it looks like it's pointing me towards math ABS, right? So if we take a look at this, where did we go? Right here. So if we just do that real quick and let's take a look. So if we say console.log 6 minus 7, right, we get -1. So if I take that and I wrap that in math.abs, right, and so it gives me a little pop-up here, X number returns the absolute value of a number, the value without regard for whether it is positive or negative. Right, so we could do that and now see that I'm getting a 1. All right, so that's using the absolute value. So we could say what happens here when we do this, math.abs. Right, so now we've got 3, 6, 10, 0, 12, 15, 1, and 0. Right, and so I can say based on this one, right, and So when we're taking the absolute value here, right? So even on the second one, let me just comment this out real quick, because this is where the math gets interesting, right? So it's picking up that 3 is 12 away from -9, 6 is 15 away, and -10 is only 1 away, right? And we get this 0 because we're just doing this. Right, so this looks more about what I'm interested in. Now, what the issue is this is giving me the basically how to identify which one is the furthest away, right? So I can say if math.abs correct number, right, is greater than furthest away, right? I want to then reassign furthest away a new value. And what I want to be careful of is that I'm not assigning the absolute value, right? Because that means that 6 is the furthest away. But if I assign the absolute value to it, I would assign furthest away to 15. So let's see here. Bum, bum. I think I would just want to do wrong nums I. And I don't know if that'll get me exactly to where I need to be yet. All right, so that gives me -10 and 6. So that does give me the right number, but it does feel like if maybe I did a, let's see here. So that's 15 in here. Does that change it to 15? Okay, yeah. So that is giving me the right number there. So that is that for this one. All right, and it is 850. So any questions on the solution on this one, or any like with the math.abs? All right, so I'm going to go ahead and stop recording.